When we began this journey about 10 weeks ago, we had a room full of strangers, didn't we?
I have never seen a more diverse and representative coalition of committed Akronites in any process of this type, ever. From every neighborhood, every age, race, socioeconomic background, and profession. And all I could think is, oh my God, here they come.
We came in not knowing each other, but we got to work, learning about housing in Akron, studying a dozen proposed solutions for achieving our shared goal. We talked about the facts, the benefits, and the trade-offs. We provided our guidance on implementation.
We did not agree on everything. These were hard conversations. There were moments where it would have been easier just to, I'm gone. Been easier. But nobody did. We stayed in the room. We listened to each other.
We all came together in pursuit of a common goal, and I never heard an angry word.
We live in a time where everything seems to be intentional about dividing us on things both big and small. But when you have the opportunity to get within 3 feet of others who may have some different perspectives and exposures than you discover that you have more in common than you have in conflict.
So here's how the voting worked. Every recommendation had to earn at least 2/3 supermajority support from this assembly to make it through. Of those 12, 9 proposals qualified with the 2/3 majority. To be recommended by the assembly, that set of 9 proposals needed to be endorsed again by a 2/3 supermajority. That meant, for many delegates, deciding whether to endorse the whole set, even if there were individual proposals you'd voted against.
The results are officially in. The 2026 Akron Civic Assembly on Housing has officially endorsed the qualifying proposals by 93%.
In partnership with you, distinguished city leaders, we respectfully submit our first and second recommendations for your thorough and thoughtful consideration.
First, creating a dedicated housing docket within the court system.
Create a public code violations database.
Establishing a system for civil housing citations.
Recommendation number 4 makes criminal history a protected class in housing.
Update zoning to make it easier to build tiny homes.
Issue a bond for housing.
Low-cost repair loans for local homeowners.
Enact comprehensive zoning reform.
The 9th recommendation is to offer down payment assistance to help more Akronites become homeowners.
We do understand the trade-offs too.
For example, setting up a housing docket takes a lot of resources.
Someone has to run it, and it has to actually reach the people that need it the most.
Delegates who were landlords in our assembly pointed out legitimate safety and legal concerns.
Zoning changes don't automatically build housing. Costs and finances still have to work.
And we know and understand that. We believe the benefits are worth it.
You will find the Assembly's full findings and guidance in the plan of the people.
If we're serious about actually fixing problems, we've got a really long road ahead. We, not just the delegates, our whole community, we've got to stay accountable.
The only way we can solve problems is by respecting each other, listening to each other, and building our future together. The good news is we have only just begun.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Mark Schmidt. I'm the director of the Political Reform Program here at New America, and I want to welcome you to this webinar. I've already learned a lot about Akron. I think the main thing I've learned is it's a city full of very charismatic people, and a lot of them seem to have come together in this assembly. We're really excited to dig deeper into your experience here. What we've tried to do here at the Political Reform Program at New America with Holly Rosen-Gilman and Sarah Jacob leading this work is to really highlight this emerging practice of citizen assemblies, which often take different forms in different places, deal with different problems, different models. Um, Akron's is one that has a longer term approach, which is a really exciting thing to see, and draw out some of the lessons of both things that have worked and things that have not worked as well that can be used for other communities, used statewide, and also begin to feed into how we think about governance even at the federal level in the United States. So we're super excited about this. And I will just turn it over to my colleagues to introduce the panelists and learn a lot more about what happened behind the scenes of the video we just saw. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. That was an amazing video, and I'm so excited to be hosting this webinar today. Thank you to everyone who's made it possible, the Future of Land and Housing program that's been co-sponsoring this event, the New America's events team, Mark and Holly. We have a great hour set up for everyone. We're very grateful to have today Matt Bryn and Morgan Lasher that are the organizers of the Akron Assembly and are part of Unify America. And we also have Jacina Chapman, who is an assembly member, joining us today. So thank you all so much for being here. To kick us off in the conversation, Morgan and Matt, do you mind giving us a little bit more background into the assembly, a little bit more color and context to what Akron is and why this assembly happened?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for having us on too. We're really jazzed to tell you a little bit more about Akron. So to start from an origin story perspective first, Matt and I both work for Unify America. We did an assembly together in a little tiny town in Colorado called Montrose, Colorado, several years ago. And what we heard from the community members after wrapping up that assembly on childcare was, wow, that process was awesome. We want to do it again. How could we get the capacity locally to run these deliberative events over and over? What does the engine look like? That really changed the strategy for our team at Unify America. And instead of thinking of ourselves as practitioners who could march around the country, how could we think of ourselves instead as seed planters in environments that are already primed and already have all of the talents and the ingredients to build a deliberative ecosystem? So we spent about a year looking for a community that was ripe with a lot of those ingredients already. Existing organizations who had deliberative capacity, facilitation, also leaders and community members who wanted to plug into issues. We needed a community with real issues. The spoiler alert here is that I am from Akron, Ohio. So from the very beginning, I'm like, Akron is the place. Akron is definitely going to be the place to test this thing. So we met with a whole bunch of folks. We did about a little bit over 300 listening sessions, community members, organizations, leaders to say, what do you think about this? Here's the concept of a civic assembly. Would this be something that's helpful and would amplify the work already happening in Akron? And instead of an outside organization running it, what would it look like if Akron ran it? So as part of the assembly process, we had 9 different form that we can talk in more detail and see some links to go dive into those details a little bit further along inside our webinar. But also to give you a quick picture of what Akron is, we are in the northeast part of the state of Ohio. We were the rubber capital of the world for quite some time, but have had a lot of population decline, as you can imagine, with a lot of Rust Belt cities. that meant that our outreach really, we kind of started from a place of community organizing instead of maybe some of the traditional, here is a postcard to invite you. Because what we had heard from all those listening sessions is if you are not invited from a source that you trust, you are not going to actually feel welcome inside the room. So Akron is about 50% owner, 50% renter. About, as you might have seen in a little clip in the video, 1 in 4 folks get assistance for that rental property. About half of Akron has a household income that's under $50,000. Also, about half of Akron is unaffiliated from a political perspective. We think of ourselves as kind of a blue dot in a red state, but that's not totally true. We've about a third of Akronites would call themselves Democrats, but there's a lot of folks who feel left out by the political process entirely, or like they don't actually have a home or a voice inside politics. So a lot of our outreach was designed to meet folks at the tables that they already were sitting at and also invite them into a place that felt like it could be theirs. And I'm very happy to jump in more to some of those outreach tactics as we go along, but wanted to paint that general picture for you in what Akron looks like. A couple other quick notes. Akron is separated into 10 wards. Historically, as ward population, really, it was every assembly was from each of those wards. And we're at 56% white, 30% racial dynamic, critical component for us in terms of what the make that room as well.
Thank you, Morgan. That is a really helpful kind of level setting into what the community of Akron looks like and how this assembly started. And we're so lucky to also have 2 assembly members that were a part of the Akron Assembly, Justina Chapman and Kevin Smith, who also goes by Smitty. I would love to hear from you both on what this process was like for you and why did you decide to apply, and yeah, how the experience was overall.
Okay, well, good afternoon. Had to check the time. Good afternoon, everyone. As introduced by Sarah, I am Jacina Chapman, and Morgan actually mentioned very interesting demographics. Just to share, kind of expound upon those things. Akron is broken up in 10 wards, and within those 10 wards, we have 24 identified neighborhoods. So what that kind of goes to show you is that diversity is very intentionally. I think there is. You have I think she said 56% white, and then we had 37% Black, I believe is what she said. But as I hear those numbers, I actually lean more into and applaud her and the team even more into their outreach efforts, because one of the things that we all know is that we're only experts in what we know. What we do most is what we do best. The conversations that we have are the ones we have most confidence in. And largely they are segmented, be they by the ward, by your location, be they by your neighborhood, by their job. We are really isolated, and this is not Akron, it's not exclusive to Akron. In the real world, we are isolated contained by our interests, contained by our politics, contained by our socioeconomic background. So hearing Morgan a little bit more about the selection process, I really want to applaud you because they did it well. I will say I came to the table. I'm fairly active in the community. I'm involved in several nonprofits. I work professionally in a nonprofit. I have done some organizing work. I've done some political work from local offices, not being an elected official, but working in organizing from local and managing campaigns for local to congressional races. So as far as my general civic engagement, it matters to me. But like Morgan said, we get postcards and we get mailers and we get flyers and we see a lot of things pop up on social media that sometimes it just feels like spam, even with the best intentions. So I applaud the Unify Akron team because I came to the table based on the people they chose as ambassadors. They chose people who were known within the community. They chose people who were visible and trusted. So that is actually how I became aware of the opportunity. Some of our delegates mentioned newspaper ads or mentioned seeing it on social media. And even though I did see it on social media, I saw it on the social media of individuals who were already engaged. So they were very wise in selecting their ambassadors. So having seen the opportunity to be a part of a civic assembly, because there wasn't a lot of information. I feel like the sound bites might have been, if you are concerned about Akron, come to the table. It was something very simple as, if you are concerned about Akron, and that alone got our attention because we go to the ballots every May, and it seems like every May and November to vote for the people who care for Akron. Usually the people who are invited to the table are, you're on a nonprofit board, you're a part of somebody's executive leadership team, you're a part of Leadership Akron, which I am, but it's different because it's more social than it is affecting true policy and affecting the lives of Akron. So if you are not a part of an elected office, if you're not external affairs, if you are not a part of a designated group, that is not an invitation that often comes out, not to be a part of. You may be invited to a ward meeting. You might be invited to a community listening session, but it's still just to listen. It's still just to be told someone else's perspective. This was the first time that I felt genuinely, that even as broad as it was, an invitation to come to the table because you care about Akron. We didn't have anything else. It said, if you care about Akron, put your name in this hat. And then if we're going to do a lottery, and then we got into the selection process. But the invitation was simply, if you care about Akron, sign up. And that's why I came to the table, because I do care about Akron. I do care about the citizens of Akron. I'm not born and raised here. I'm born and raised in Buffalo, New York, came to Ohio by way of Kent State University, go Flashes. And so, just as in life, we oftentimes make our lives where we are. Jobs will do it, love will do it, relationships will do it. And so that's how I came to Akron. So while I did not have, the hometown pride, you have to have a hometown pride in where you live. You have to have concern when you live. So being an Akronite today, the invitation was exciting. It was, again, as vague as it was exciting because it was novel. And so when I heard that, to have the opportunity, there was no guarantee. We actually knew nothing about how it was going to happen. They said by lottery. So I'm going to tell you the truth. I expected there were going to be thousands of people putting their names in the hat. And so I had no expectation of what was to come. But I will say I was excited about the simple invitation that if you care about Akron, come to this table. So that's how I came. I came because it's important to come to the table where many of us are not often invited, because if you're not elected, you don't really get a voice. You get the mic sometimes. You go to a council meeting or you go to a city council meeting, you get a mic for 3 minutes at a time. You may be able to do an op-ed at the local newspaper to speak your mind. But again, that's not invited. And because it's not invited, you have, it's essentially a well-spoken vent. You don't have an expectation of results. You don't have an expectation of turnaround. You don't have an expectation of your voice and your concerns being heard. This was an invitation to come to the table simply because you cared about Akron. So that's how I came. That's why I came. And I am very, very proud of the fact that I did come. I'm sure you guys will have more questions about process. But so for now, I'll kind of pass it along to Schmitty, who can tell you more about what brought him to the table.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if there's a whole lot more than I can add to that. My situation was a bit different. I knew of no invitation. I knew nothing about the Civic Assembly. I did not even insert my name. Those who have been around this process who know me know that story. But someone else knows my background, and they put my name and email in the lottery. And I was fortunate enough to be picked. And like Jacina said, oftentimes you're getting these emails and spams and this and that. So I ignored it for probably at least 2 weeks until finally I opened one and read it a bit. And then I called Chicago to get, the ballistics and discovered what it was. Once it was explained to me exactly what it was about, I had to do it. It was not really a choice for me. This kind of opportunity presents itself, so I had to man a post, and I'm elated that I did. But Jacina is correct in terms of, or at least in part, in my opinion, I had a little bit of a different perspective. The citizenry and your ability to be able to affect and voices being heard and such. Her points are well taken. I think that your commitment to the level in which you want to engage determines whether you are heard or not. The Civic Assembly created a structured format that allows regular citizenry to raise the level of their voices and to engage with our city fathers, to a greater level. So that you have individual citizens that will attempt to try to build that framework on their own. Very few people are always at the, city council meetings and always here and there trying to engage in certain kinds of ways to ultimately have those voices heard. Jacina is one of those people. Even prior to this, she indicated that her level of involvement. My situation is not dissimilar. I actually work in finance for my real job, but I am so involved in a number of other things. People will swear to you that I either work for the city, I either work for Akron Public Schools, or I'm a preacher. That last one, I don't I don't know where that comes from. I guess it's because I'm always in a suit. But none of that is what I do for my professional employed. So I'm also one of those people who is engaged in a number of different ways. But the Civic Assembly created a structured environment that allows for the regular citizenry to engage with our city fathers and put forth solutions that can be heard, and almost force, if you will, a gentle nudge, if you will, in terms of implementation. I really don't think and believe that, our city fathers and those who are in leadership have the option of ignoring what we've done here. And that is a good thing. So I that's kind of how I got involved. I got drafted, if you will, into the process. But had I known about exactly what it was doing and why, then they wouldn't have had to draft me. I would have signed up willingly.
Thank you both. That's so interesting to hear. And I feel like so many interesting threads to pull on from what you guys said. Christina, I love what you said about having a mic versus a voice. I feel like assemblies are a real part of, shaping people's experience in policy making. And Kevin, I loved what you said about you're just ignoring this and you thought it was spam. I feel like we're always inundated with so much information on a daily basis. How do you know who is a trusted source and who you can actually rely on? So Morgan and Matt, I feel like this leads into our next question about who are the partners and stakeholders involved in this process and the people that really shaped the experience for those community members in Akron.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to try to turn off my video just because I'm having some internet unreliability. And I might tag you in, Matt, if y'all still have any trouble hearing me or if I keep breaking up. But one thing we teased at the beginning was we had 9 different teams that supported this assembly. The very first team that formed, they called themselves the kitchen table. And they were folks who had a lot of trust inside the community, who had been leaders like lowercase L. Some had really important and impressive titles, and others were the ones who were kind of the center of the network that they created inside their own communities. So we had this table to really guide the process from the very beginning. And our goal was that everybody in Akron could look at that table and say, oh, there's someone I trust who's at the table. And this looks like an unlikely partnership of people who don't normally get together. Then they helped form all these different teams. One of the teams was called the accountability team, and they looked at the process really holistically. And they met every month to say, what's going on? What are the updates? They would, look at transcripts from meetings, and they asked themselves one question. That was, is this worthy of the public's trust? And that is the standard that they put towards all of the design process questions. We also had an outreach team. As Jacina said, we were really looking for trusted ambassadors, people who were already embedded inside the community, who already had existing relationships and trust. This whole thing relies, the engine of it all is trust. That's what we did in a lot of our design. How do we build more and more trust? We even called the small groups that the delegates sat in together every week trusts. That's the bullseye of the whole thing. Of course, we want to make great policy updates, but none of that is possible if there's not a sense of civic trust and real civic muscle that folks can use. There was another group that called themselves the solutions team. And these were folks that worked in housing every day. And again, unlikely partners though. So it's folks who work in banks and mortgages, and it's folks who are organizing tenant unions. It's landlords, and it's folks at the city who've been doing planning for 30 years. So a really big cross section. That was an 18-person group. During that outreach process, we got about 100, and I think it was 165 total ideas from the community. And these were also from reports that have been sitting on shelves or some that were just created. And that solutions team looked at all those ideas and also said, which are the ones that really desperately need public input, that are the ones that need our neighbors to weigh in because there's not a clear way forward, or there needs to be deep guidance from participants. So I think one of our big questions was how do stakeholders and people who work and know housing so deeply and would be part of the implementation story, how are they incorporated without holding the microphone as they usually do at these kinds of events? So they were on that solutions team, and they also supported our research team that built materials for the delegates to look at. And what we also learned that group of 18, they don't get to be at these meetings together very often. So several of the ideas, they're like, oh my gosh, this is actually kind of a quick win. I know how we can pull this thing off quickly. This doesn't need a full civic assembly process. It actually just needs 2 meetings. This is a great idea. We should move forward on this thing. So I think that was exciting to see their ability to connect with each other and spot those quick wins that did not need the full assembly process itself. And I'll also, maybe one other quick thing to note, the university was a big part of this story as well. And other organizations. I think I mentioned at the top this idea of deliberative capacity, which I apologize, that is this too buzzy word. But really what that meant for us is, are there folks who already live in Akron who are great facilitators? I think that's true across many, many, many communities. Skills of facilitation, skills of research, skills of difficult conversations. So many of our community organizations are already great at that. How can we point their expertise towards this process and leverage all of it?
Amazing. It sounds like there's just such a large network that was part of actually making this assembly possible, and so much investment from community organizations and members. Now that we have like a little bit more context and color to actually the assembly process and the design itself, I'm curious into hearing a little bit more about why housing. Like housing itself just feels like such like a broad topic to breach. How were you guys able to like put constraints around the topic and the recommendations that came forth? Yeah, I would love to hear from both the organizers and then Jacina and Kevin, like what is your relationship to housing in Akron?
Quickly, from our perspective, we had those 300 plus listening conversations where we're saying, does Akron need an assembly? And if so, what's the topic? We, as you could guess, we'd have a bunch of ideas of what the topics could be. And we were trying to play a matchmaking game of what did residents really want to talk about? What were the pains that people are experiencing in Akron every day? And what are the topics that elected officials really needed public input on? We didn't want to just do something that was not going to have impact from an elected official perspective. We wanted this to be a real tool for them and not just another report that's going to collect dust on a fancy desk somewhere. So there were actually 4 topic ideas that landed in that middle of the Venn diagram that the city deeply needed public input on and the community really wanted to talk about. In Akron, our goal is not to have one assembly. We want to build an engine that can do assemblies over and over and over again. So our goal was also to pick a first assembly topic that we could really have some wins around. We could actually change policy and we can change budget around, and housing became that one that felt like the most ripe for hard conversations that needed to happen immediately and possible change to law and to budgets. Matt, would you add anything there?
No, I was going to sort of speak to a little bit of what I heard in your question, Sarah, which was around scope. And I think, if you think about just the topic of housing, it's a very big topic. And you can imagine ways in which you allow the scope to get so wide that there's not enough time to really get into enough of the details of any one proposal to feel good about the recommendations. And so as a sort of filter over the entire scoping exercise is this question of what kinds of information do delegates need to understand in order to have robust recommendations on this proposal. And so when there were questions that really related to pretty highly technical sort of aspects of a particular proposal, we were really careful to guardrail the conversation so that the recommendations are built on what can be learned in the amount of time we had for the assembly. And so we handled scope not at the level of kind of subdomain of housing. We did cover pretty much the entirety of housing in terms of the 4 different domains that we decided to break it up into. But in terms of not creating an overwhelming information load, the distinction of the assembly's role, where they were responsible for guidance on the recommendations, whereas this later process, which we're going to get into in a minute here about the impact team and what comes after the recommendations, we really carefully sort of designated the role of getting into the weeds and the policy-making questions related to, intricate, technical design questions to this later step so that we could clear the assembly up to focus on what it can do best.
And I'll also add from a learning perspective, I'll say a learning perspective from my own brain, not necessarily speaking on behalf of all of us yet, but one of the pieces of feedback we keep coming back to was how many recommendations we tried to cover in the time that we had. I think Smitty and Jason, y'all could maybe talk more to this point, but one of the big pieces of feedback we hear is, gosh, we wish we had more time. And these are really complicated issues that I think in hindsight, there may be other ways for us to look at what that learning journey looks like for everybody and how to tackle this huge issue of housing. And we did have a scope that was related to what could the city of Akron do. There's plenty that the state of Ohio could and should be doing about housing. So yes, I think there's a lot for us to learn there though too, in how to structure the solutions, and maybe 12 was too many to try to tackle in the 40 hours that we had.
Christina, Kevin, anything else to add?
Yeah, so I actually, again, not having been on the teams that were coming up with the how do we land on housing, I'll actually just say kudos and landing on housing. The reason being, just like with every city, we have a lot of issues. I am of a mind that housing is a right. You know what I mean? It's a basic human right. And so when we think about a civic assembly, so we think about the reality that we are not a legislative office, a legislative branch, we are a civic assembly. This is one of those places where the public should have the most input. I say that because as Morgan was talking, there's a couple things that I thought about. I equate housing, if from a city perspective, housing is as important as I put education and job creation, because the reality is where you live and how you feel about the space that you live has direct impact on the quality that you subscribe to your life. And if you do not subscribe a high quality of life to the location that you are in, you are also increasing the likelihood of flight. So the legislation has, the city council, they have to deal with K through 12 schooling. We have some conversation about that, but I don't know that the assembly would have been most effective there. If you ask what will come next, it'll be about matter of public safety, specifically as it relates to the youth. But then that too gets a little stickier. So as it relates to a pilot opportunity, I thought housing was fantastic because, again, as Morgan said, the work's already being done from a legislative and a grassroots perspective, which means that there's already not only need, but buy-in from both sides. Right. So that was a great place to start a conversation because you already have concern. The North Star, as we're always told, is safe and affordable housing. Safe and affordable housing. So when you think about safe and affordable housing, it is as much the safety of your neighborhood as we got into talking to it. It's also about if you can walk safely up the stairs in your home. So we're also talking about the infrastructure of a house, the foundation of a house. And those are things that the city of Akron, from a legislative perspective, can't much speak to because of its limitations, be it the lack of housing inspections, because that's not already a part of their systems. The only people that can speak to the living conditions are those who are living in it. So it was a perfect opportunity to bring a necessary and unique voice because city council does not know people's living conditions. We know surveys. We know taxation. We know, they know the values that are assigned to the homes, but the only people who can speak to the living conditions of Akron are Akronites. So I thought that was an absolutely fantastic first step in building validity, credibility, and opportunity for civic assemblies.
From my vantage point, I hearken back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The very base ground level first example or necessity, if you will, in that space, safety, food, clothing, those kinds of things. The basic stuff. Everybody here, or at least most of our citizenry here, have some place to stay. But as we know, there is a considerable homeless population in our city. So they're struggling in that particular place. Affordability is a challenge. As a person who works in finance and has been in this space, it's kind of the thing that got me drafted into this, whether it is helping people to acquire their first homes or repositioning assets to help them build wealth, those kind of things. I've been doing this for more than 30 years. So the housing piece was an exceptional place to start, in my opinion. If you can build on that, then a whole lot of other things can be taken care of from there. So I was elated by the fact that they started there, that we began in the space of housing, because as Justina indicated, everybody has a right to a safe and affordable place to live. If you have that, you can build, on other things to essentially, try to enhance your particular existence. So that's kind of my take on it.
If I could add just one more thing. Oftentimes we hear it, even though we're speaking. I don't think I've heard it in this space, but oftentimes when we think about the housing situation in Akron, it's actually considered a housing crisis. The housing crisis, though, goes down to whether it is a limitation of housing for ownership or rentals. there's a limitation. We have blighted homes up and down every street in every neighborhood that the city itself has said we don't have the budget to get rid of. We know we have blighted homes, what comes with that as far as safety, as far as decreased home values. So from every perspective, that's why I think it was really good that you had renters, you have homeowners, you had people who were investment, who are actually using property as a modem of investment. We had everybody at the table, including some who had expertise in finance. We had everyone at the table because this is truly one of those things that affects everyone. You may be a little less concerned about education if you don't have any children. You may be a little less concerned about some other items if they are not directly in your face. But the housing crisis that we are currently experiencing affects every income base, every single one of our 10 wards and every single one of our 24 neighborhoods rather. It affects everyone. So again, just kudos to the courage to address it.
Thank you guys. That was really powerful, and so agree on using that language when talking about housing. And Justina, I think you mentioned something around this idea of like this infrastructure, and I think that really ties into like the work that Unify America is doing in terms of like building civic infrastructure in these communities. So I want to hear from Morgan and Matt, now that the assembly is over, what happens to the recommendations? What does this process look like moving forward? And what is this infrastructure going to be like in Akron moving forward?
This is one I've been excited about this whole process, as you could hopefully tell. But this next stage, I think, is the part that I am most excited about for Akron. We have a lot of examples of reports that are beautiful and then don't go anywhere next. And what all of the delegates have continued to advocate for, but also live out, is what we just did was chapter 1. We are turning the page now to a much, much longer book together. So what's happening over this summer and really kicking off in a much bigger way this fall are impact teams. So you saw those 9 different recommendations in the video. They each are going to have working groups that include delegates, include community members who are living it, but also including practitioners from the government, from different organizations who would actually be implementing them. So from a housing bond perspective, it would include folks at our Port Authority, the ones who have the authority to actually pull a bond for the city. So in partnership with government and residents, the hard work of the details really starts now. What the delegates did as part of the process that you can see in their report is they looked at what's good about this idea, what are trade-offs about this idea, but most importantly, I think, is their level of complexity and nuance on the guidance of how, because how you implement it is actually the most important part. So all of those impact teams are starting from the guidance that the delegates put together to say, okay, if we want to do a housing bond, let's look at the guidance of what the delegates said. How should it actually work? What are the conditions under which this assembly has indicated would be most helpful for them and most specific for them? So the impact teams are starting to form now and are really going to be doing some learning together, as the assembly did as well, trust building together in those groups, and then meeting. Another part of that is it's certainly these impact groups in partnership with the government, but there's also a piece of what is the government's role now that they have these recommendations. And this was outlined in the very beginning of our relationships in Akron with the signed memorandum of understanding with the mayor's office and a resolution that actually was unanimously passed by Akron City Council, which was a really big deal for us. And that resolution and that MOU outlined the relationship that we would have over the next 2.5 years. So every 6 months, the government is giving a public report back to the delegates, to Unify Akron, but also to the whole community to say, we heard you on these 9 recommendations. Here's where we are so far. this is what's moving. This is what's stuck. Here's why it's stuck. This is what we learned. This is how we're pivoting. So every 6 months, the Unify Akron team and staff is helping them organize these report outs, but also inviting delegates and the whole community to be part of those conversations too. So this just does not sit somewhere. It's actively in the hands of people who know they are being held accountable and are going to report out constantly, but also not alone, that they're in partnership with these delegates who've studied it for 40, 50 hours now, who are some of the experts in our community now on how to move these things forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Morgan. And I want to jump into our audience Q&A. We are getting some great questions. And I feel like this question from the audience really ties into also the really unique aspect of the Akron Assembly, which was the super assembly process. So someone asked, how did you engage those who applied to be delegates but were not selected?
Sorry for this back and forth audio. This was another thing that I think we saw in some of other examples of civic assemblies where in Akron we had 584 people raise their hand to say they want to serve on the assembly. It's a huge number and a really diverse set of folks who raised their hands. 65 people got lucky, but that leaves over 500 people who wanted to serve their community. So what we tried this time, and I think we still have a lot to learn here, but what we tried was something we were calling a super assembly. That group got invited to meet together 4 times throughout the 10-week assembly to look at the orientation materials that the delegates learned about. So they learned about things like experience bias and confirmation bias and deliberative kind of mindset stuff. And they talked about their own experiences in housing with each other and in small groups together. All of that is part of our final report. And they also did a couple of activities that the delegates also did. Things like, if you had $100 to spend on housing, how would you spend it? Where would you put your taxpayer dollars and why? So it was a bit of a parallel process. I think there are many things that that group could also be doing, many learnings that could support future assemblies. Some of their feedback has been like, could we learn how to be facilitators so we could apply to help facilitate the next civic assembly? Could we weigh in more on ideas, or could we give you more anecdotes about the problems that we're experiencing in housing? So I think there's a lot of really interesting ideas that we want to try for next time too, of how to get their voices into the assembly process more. And spend that time together with them to really build the skills and capacity that they want to bring back into their neighborhoods too. So I'm really excited about that potential. And of those 500, I should also say, they got a survey of, we loved sending surveys out. They got a survey, and about 80 of them said in that survey, I would like to be a leader. I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know if that's in my neighborhood or if that's in the city in some way, but I want to lead something like this, which I think is a really a kind of incredible point to this network. And really it speaks to some of the upcoming goals of Unify Akron. How can we be a vessel with some really clear goals and visions and resources and tools, but it's also empty enough that people can pour themselves into and make it their own and do the things that they need inside their blocks and their communities.
Awesome. Sounds like skill building is a really big part of this process, not just for the assembly members themselves, but people that were volunteering to be a part of the assembly process, which kind of ties into this next question that we have from the audience. I think a lot of that skill building happens in like moments of tension and growth for members. Someone asked, seems like the assembly reached broad consensus on the recommendations, but can you talk about the tensions that surfaced during discussions and what tools were used to navigate and resolve disagreements constructively? Maybe Justina or Kevin, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, someone actually said it in one of the videos. You didn't, you all, you, I can say you didn't hear angry voices. People weren't angry. I will credit that to a couple things. The first session, maybe first two sessions were teaching sessions where we were learning how to come together. We were learning how to listen. We were learning how to respect one another. I think one of the other things that you can't teach, but by this invitation, you got it. Some of it is simply commonality, actually coming willingly, voluntarily coming to the table to say, I want to be a part of. Even though we didn't have rules of, if you do this, you'll be you'll be dismissed. We didn't have those type of conversations, but there was a sense of, I want to be here. And so even when we had differences, and after talking, talking it out, there were people who had some less than ideal moments within their trust. But I think that that's natural. We have less than ideal moments within our families. But when you love the reason why you're there, you stick to it, right? We don't walk away from relationships. We don't walk away from our children. We don't walk away from our spouses. We don't walk away from our jobs because of disagreement. We walk away when we don't find value. And so I think that between the facilitators who were really good as far as kind of managing conversations, and when things did get off the rails, because sometimes they get off the rails because people are excited. It's not even always bad. We just became a family and we're breaking bread and having dinner time. So sometimes it was just the facilitator's job to bring us back to center. There were times that you wanted to move on because things may have gotten tense. But again, I think that there's a couple things that worked in our favor. There were the fact that most of the time we rotated our trust. And I speak to that, and I will continue to speak to that as an advantage, because what it disallows is for us to be stuck in the moment. So if you had a moment on Thursday, coming back on Saturday and not seeing the exact same people and not being thrown back into that exact same table, it changes the dynamic. It allows for healing. It allows for a break. It allows for someone else to shift the energy. It allows for momentum shifts, even though the structure maintained topic clarity. So it kind of, you can't manage humanity, but it helped to manage the human experience. And I think that managing the human experience in that way kept us moving along. And because we didn't have to sit in our hurts, it allowed us to not be so bothered by discomfort. Right. We have another moment of discomfort now. We're not stuck on that one. Now we have to talk about another thing. And so I think that the schedule really helped to lend to that. And I think the other part of it was, like Kevin said, who's leaving? When you actually value the conversation being had, it brings to life a stick-to-itness.
That's beautiful. Kevin, do you have anything else to add?
Yes. Okay, so really what was happening is, if anyone disagreed too vigorously, Morgan and Sue asked me to take my suit jacket off and take them in the back and rough them up. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, none of that actually happened. There were tense moments, but as Jacina has indicated, when you have the opportunity to get within, well, first let me say this. Oftentimes, those attitudes and positions, feelings, or belief systems that we have around certain subjects, this one, obviously, is one that people can be passionate about. Oftentimes, there's a limited view or perspective. It is our lived experience that we're bringing to that. So I'll speak to that first to comment about what Jacina said. The first, I know 95, maybe 100% of that first session was just about clearing our palettes of the mental and emotional beliefs or biases that we've had about the subject. It prepared us to get ready to have some honest conversations, rather than just coming in with all of the stuff in concrete and etched in stone about what we think and believe about things, and then trying to mix that up, in the blender of a delegation. It helped us to remove that before we even got into the subject matter. So having said that, now you're a little bit better prepared to discuss these things. You're doing it in trust, if you will, And words are very powerful. So again, trying to create an environment, an opportunity to be able to have those kind of open conversations. But also your ability to get within 3 feet of people that you have differences with and learn more about them as individuals than just what they believe about this particular topic. It gave it a human element and those differing positions, if you will, that ultimately put you in position to be able to consider it at a deeper level. It's not just a black and white X and Y thing. Perfect example is initially when I approached this, my position on criminal history as a protected class was somewhat limited. I wasn't sure that this should rise to the level of having something where we actually moved to the place to where it was considered like disabilities or race or any of those other kind of things. I do think it's important because I do recognize that there are certain biases, if you will, that can preclude people who have a criminal history from getting housing. But I wasn't quite all the way until I sat in the trust with someone who actually had a criminal history. And they opened my eyes to some things in terms of safety and how disabled veterans and those that suffer from PTSD are actually more likely to injure or hurt someone than the general individual that has a criminal history. But we will treat the criminals as if they're dangerous, but not disabled veterans. So we got into some of those kind of conversations. And so while there may have been disagreement, because some of that hit us too as well in terms of education, because obviously housing has a property tax component, and that spawned into conversations about education and funding and X, Y, and Z. And as somebody who has done some extensive volunteer work in that space over the past 4 years, it allowed me to be able to educate some people to some things that they were not aware of. Again, the limited perspective, your lived experience, what you know in your silo, if you will, as Jacina indicated earlier when we first began our conversation today. Being in that environment kind of allows you to be able to wash away some of that so that you can get to dealing with the real issue that you were there for. And so because of that, it created an environment to be able to have civil disagreements. In some cases, come to a consensus on an issue, and in others, being willing to disagree without being disagreeable. So yeah, that was kind of my experience as it relates, because some of it got a little tense. I mean, we believe what we believe. The question becomes, are we willing to believe something different when we have different facts, knowledge, and information? Do we have the ability to be able to separate ourselves and our personal value as an individual from the idea we have on a particular topic? And that is really where, if you want to be honest, and I'm not sure I've even shared this before, but that is really the basis for vigorous disagreement and arguments. Oftentimes we think and believe that if a person disagrees with what we think or believe, they are somehow devaluing us as a person because we have tied ourselves so intricately to our belief systems. And so if you attack that, you're attacking me, and the first law of nature is self-preservation. And so people tend to fight and get, volatile in these kind of spaces. Disagreeing with a particular idea on a topic does not automatically indicate that I'm disagreeing with you or your value as a person. And this environment kind of helped to uncover some of that and wash some of that away without actually getting into the nuance in the way that I've just described.
That's so powerful. Thank you, Kevin. I feel like that sort of tension and growth and, the true shift in perspective can only really happen in these trusted shared spaces like this. So I want to pass over to Matt and Morgan for any closing remarks or anything else that you want to share about the assembly process now that we're at the end of the hour.
The only thing I might share especially for any other practitioners on this call is how much we have learned from the delegates. I mean, as you can hear today from Smitty and Jacina, don't be afraid to pivot. Don't be afraid to evolve your process. Your delegates know so much about what they need to succeed. Just be really open to listening and to pivoting and to making it better.
Yeah, I don't know what to add beyond what Morgan just said. So that was lovely, and I totally agree on all counts. If I were to say one more phrase in the direction of the just how much the orientation and the entire vibe in which what the delegates created that sense of safety and that celebration of disagreement to do it well. It's also important to structure it into the deliberation itself, meaning celebrate and acknowledge that in this section, we're going to focus on where we disagreed based on our last conversation. And so to don't, yes, you sort of raise the baseline for everyone to be willing to do that, but then also build in the prompt, build in the structure where that is supposed to occur.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt and Morgan. Those beautiful words to end off this discussion in. Thank you, everyone who joined us for this conversation. We could have gone on for another hour, I think, but this was amazing. And we hope you will continue to engage with the work that Unify America does and that U America is doing around citizens assembly work. So thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your day.